Sade Balogun, a resilient Nigerian woman navigating life in Seoul, secures a position as the live-in maid for Marcus Vale, a formidable Black American mafia boss residing in a high-security penthouse. Assigned to care for Marcus's mother, Evelyn Crown, a stroke survivor who has become a ghost in her own home, Sade refuses to treat her as a patient. Instead, she honors Evelyn's humanity through the rhythmic art of traditional hair braiding and the comforting aroma of Nigerian jollof rice, slowly coaxing the matriarch's spirit back from the shadows. However, Sade soon pierces the polished veneer of Marcus's high society fiancée, Vanessa Laurent. Beneath Vanessa's curated lifestyle brand and delicate silk dresses lies a predator systematically dismantling Evelyn's mind. Vanessa orchestrates a campaign of invisible cruelty, withholding Evelyn's glasses, inflicting accidental bruises, and gaslighting Marcus into believing his mother is slipping into dementia, all to seize control of the family's massive trust. The tension shatters when Sade witnesses Vanessa strike the defenseless Evelyn. Breaking every servant protocol and risking her livelihood, Sade intervenes with a physical force born of righteous fury. Despite Vanessa's theatrical performances of victimhood and Marcus's initial agonizing disbelief, the truth is finally laid bare through hidden security footage.
If you believe the truth is worth fighting for, hit that subscribe button right now. We are peeling back the layers of a story where a servant becomes a guardian and a king realizes he's been sleeping with the enemy. If you're ready to see the moment the servant protocol finally snaps, drop a like and let's dive into the truth.
The elevator climbed 43 floors in a silence so absolute it made Sade's ears pop. When the door slid open, she didn't step into an apartment. She stepped into a fortress of glass and cold ambition. The penthouse was a cathedral of white marble and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a sprawling, hazy Seoul, but there was no scent of life, only the sterile, expensive aroma of bergamot and filtered air. Marcus Vale stood by the windows, his back a broad, tailored cliff of black wool. He didn't turn when she entered. He simply watched the Namsan Tower in the distance, a king surveying a kingdom he held with clenched fists. "You're the one from Lagos," he said, his voice a low, rhythmic baritone that carried the weight of a man used to being obeyed. "My mother doesn't speak. She doesn't react. You are here to ensure she is clean, fed, and out of the way. Do not mistake her silence for a request for conversation." Sade smoothed the front of her gray uniform, her fingers catching on the humble fabric. "With respect, Mr. Vale, silence is rarely a choice. It is usually a cage." Marcus turned then, his dark eyes sharp and unreadable, measuring the woman who dared to offer a philosophy instead of a "yes, sir." He gestured toward the far wing of the penthouse before walking past her, leaving a wake of cold power. Sade found Evelyn Crown in a sun-drenched corner that felt like a sensory desert. The older woman sat in a motorized wheelchair, her body small and compressed, as if she were trying to occupy the least amount of space possible. Her white hair, which should have been a crown, was pulled back into a utilitarian frizzy knot. Her hands lay limp in her lap, fingers curled like dried leaves. She was a woman erased. Sade knelt on the marble, placing herself beneath Evelyn's line of sight. She didn't check a pulse or reach for a thermometer. Instead, she took a deep breath, letting the warmth of her own presence fill the vacuum between them. "Ikaro ma," Sade whispered, the Yoruba greeting soft and musical against the glass walls. Evelyn's eyes didn't move, but a tiny flicker, a microscopic twitch of a muscle in her jaw betrayed her. She had been treated as a piece of furniture for 3 years, a problem to be managed by the perfect fiancé and the busy son. Sade saw the vivid red handprint of the Seoul sunset on the wall, but she looked closer at the woman. Beneath the slack expression, there was a spark buried under layers of trauma and neglect. "My grandmother told me that some souls don't leave," Sade said, her voice steady and grounding. "They just go into hiding until someone remembers the way back." She reached out, gently touching the back of Evelyn's withered hand. It was cold. Sade didn't pull away. She stayed there,
a girl from the heat of Lagos determined to thaw the ice of a 43rd floor prison.
The elevator climbed 43 floors. The sterile silence of the penthouse was the first thing Sade decided to kill. It began with the rhythmic thud-thud of a wooden spoon against a heavy pot, and the bold, unapologetic scent of ginger, thyme, and Scotch bonnet peppers blooming in the professional-grade kitchen. The smell of jollof rice, rich, smoky, and defiant, crept through the glass corridors, a warm intruder in a world of cold marble. Sade wheeled Evelyn into the center of the kitchen, away from the view that usually served as her only companion. "Today, Ma, we are not looking at buildings," Sade murmured, setting a bowl of warm water and oils on the table. "Today, we are looking at you." With practiced, reverent fingers, Sade undid the tight, neglected knot of Evelyn's hair. She worked slowly, massaging the scalp with shea butter, feeling the tension in the older woman's neck begin to fray. As the water for the rice simmered, Sade began to braid. Her fingers danced in the familiar patterns of their ancestors, crossing and tucking, creating neat, sharp rows of cornrows that mirrored the strength still hidden in Evelyn's bones. "My mother used to say that a woman's hair is her map," Sade whispered, her voice a low hum that harmonized with the bubbling pot. "If you lose the map, you lose the way home. We are finding the way home today." As the last braid was tucked, Sade brought a small spoonful of the vibrant orange rice to Evelyn's lips. For 3 years, Evelyn had been fed bland, lukewarm purees, food for a body, not a soul. Sade waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. The first taste hit. Evelyn's eyes, usually clouded and distant, suddenly sharpened. Her throat worked in a hard swallow. Then a sound emerged, not a word, but a low, guttural rasp of recognition. It was the sound of a woman waking up. Sade laughed softly, a bright, Lagos-born sound that bounced off the minimalist cabinets. "Ah, you remember the heat, don't you?" Evelyn's hand, once a dried leaf, twitched on the armrest of the wheelchair. Her fingers fumbled upward, trembling, until they brushed against the neat, firm texture of her new braids. A shadow of a smile, fragile as spun glass, tugged at the corner of her mouth. It wasn't a full recovery, but it was a crack in the fortress. When Marcus walked in an hour later, the scent of the spices hit him like a physical blow. He stopped in the doorway, frozen. He didn't see a patient in a wheelchair. He saw a woman with her head held high, wearing a crown of braids, her eyes tracking the movement of the sunlight. For the first time in years, the penthouse didn't feel like a vault. It felt like a house where someone was finally home.
The warmth of the kitchen was instantly snuffed out, not by a draft, but by a sudden, cloying scent that tried too hard to be beautiful. It was expensive perfume, heavy with white florals, designed to mask something rotten. Vanessa Laurent swept into the penthouse wing like a prima ballerina taking her final bow, her arms cradling a massive, bleeding heart arrangement of red roses and white lilies. She was breathtaking, all cultivated edges and choreographed smiles, wearing a tailored dress the color of fresh cream that pooled around her ankles. Sade, still standing by Evelyn's chair, felt a primal instinct, sharp as a Scotch bonnet pepper, ignite in her gut. Danger. "Oh, look at you two," Vanessa chirped, her voice a high, tinkling bell that didn't quite harmonize with the rich hum of the space. She glided past Marcus, brushing her cheek against his, before descending upon Evelyn. "My goodness, what have we done here? Braids? How quaint. It's so ethnic, isn't it, Marcus?" She didn't wait for an answer. She leaned down, burying her face in the flowers, before shoving the bouquet directly into Evelyn's lap, heedless of the thorns or the weight. Evelyn flinched, the delicate shadow of the smile she'd worn moments ago vanishing. "And jollof rice. I smelled it all the way from the elevator," Vanessa said, turning her icy blue eyes on Sade. The gaze was assessing, calculating, like a jeweler checking a stone for flaws. "Very daring. I'm not sure such spicy food is appropriate for a delicate stroke recovery, dear. We must be careful not to shock her system." Sade held the woman's gaze, her spine rigid beneath the gray uniform. The concern was theatrical, a mask worn for Marcus, who stood watching from the doorway with an expression of tired adoration. "Ms. Laurent,
Some shocks are necessary to stir a resting heart. Vanessa's smile tightened, the edges cracking. Indeed. She turned back to Evelyn, her hands moving like striking snakes to grip the older woman's shoulders. It looked like a hug to Marcus, but from where Sade stood, she saw the white knuckles, the precise points where Vanessa's manicured nails were dug into Evelyn's fragile skin. Evelyn gave a soft, almost imperceptible gasp of pain. "I've booked the appointment with Dr. Eris," Vanessa announced, straightening up and smoothing Evelyn's neatly braided hair with a dismissal so absolute it was violent. "We can't have our darling Evelyn living in a dream world forever. It's time to accept her limitations." Vanessa took Marcus's arm, her weaponized beauty pulling him away from the kitchen, away from the truth. Sade watched them go, her fingers still stained with the shea butter from Evelyn's braids. She looked at Evelyn, who had recoiled deep inside herself again. The scent of the roses was suffocating, choking out the warm spice of the jollof. The predator had arrived, and she hadn't come to heal. She had come to kill.
The sun had shifted across the marble floor, casting long, skeletal shadows of the window frames against the far wall, but Evelyn hadn't moved an inch. When Sade returned from her brief break, she found the wheelchair positioned in the dead corner of the living room, facing a blank expanse of white paint. 5 hours. Sade knew the math because she had left Evelyn near the balcony, watching the birds. Now the older woman sat staring into the void of the corner, her nose mere inches from the plaster. It was a sensory deprivation chamber in an open-air palace. The choreographed cruelty of it made Sade's blood run cold. There were no bruises to report, no broken bones to show Marcus. Just the slow, methodical erasure of a human mind through forced isolation. "Ma," Sade whispered, stepping into the corner. Evelyn didn't blink. Her eyes were fixed on a microscopic blemish in the paint, her breathing shallow and jagged. She looked like a prisoner of war who had finally stopped fighting the dark. I heard a soft, rhythmic click-clack of heels on the marble. She turned to find Vanessa standing by the wet bar, swirling a glass of chilled white wine. The fiancée didn't look like a villain. She looked like a magazine cover, the afternoon light catching the diamonds at her throat. "I moved her," Vanessa said simply, her voice a cool breeze. She was getting overstimulated by the city. The doctor says a quiet, neutral environment is best for her. Episodes. "She has been facing this wall for 5 hours, Miss Laurent," Sade said, her voice trembling with a controlled rage that felt like a physical weight. "That is not a neutral environment. That is a tomb." Vanessa set her glass down with a precise, echoing clink. She walked toward Sade, the mask of the doting daughter-in-law slipping just enough to show the jagged teeth beneath. "You are here to clean the floors and change the sheets, Sade. You are not a doctor. You are a domestic." She leaned in, the scent of white florals once again choking the air. "By the time I'm done, Marcus will be convinced she doesn't even know her own name. And once she's moved to the facility in Gyeonggi, you'll be back on a plane to Lagos with a very poor reference. Don't make me accelerate the timeline." Vanessa reached past Sade and adjusted the wheelchair, pushing it an inch closer to the wall, a final, petty act of dominance. Sade watched her glide away, her heart hammering a war drum against her ribs. She looked back at Evelyn, whose small, braided head was bowed. This was the strategy. Break the mind until the body had no reason to stay. Vanessa wasn't just waiting for Evelyn to die. She was actively killing the person inside the shell, 5 hours of silence at a time. Sade knelt beside the chair, taking Evelyn's cold hand in hers. The servant protocol was a thin thread now, frayed and ready to snap.
The air in Marcus Vale's office was pressurized, a vacuum of power where the roar of Seoul's traffic was reduced to a distant, powerless hum. He sat behind a desk of obsidian glass, his silhouette framed by the darkening sky. When Sade entered, she didn't wait for an invitation. The image of Evelyn staring at that white wall was a brand on her mind, burning through the last of her patience. "She is being erased, Mr. Vale," Sade said, her voice a steady blade in the stillness. Marcus didn't look up from his tablet. "I told you to stay in the living quarters, Sade. My mother's care is being managed. Vanessa has the reports from the specialists." Vanessa is the one writing the reports with her actions, Sade countered, stepping into the light of his desk lamp. I found your mother facing a corner for 5 hours today. No music, no light, no dignity. Your fiancé is not protecting her. She is breaking her so she can justify locking her away. Marcus finally looked up. His face was a mask of cold fatigue, the eyes of a man who dealt in blood and shadows all day and expected peace when he returned to his glass castle. Vanessa has been by my side since my father's car went over that bridge. She stayed when everyone else ran. She has spent 3 years mourning a woman who is still breathing but doesn't know who I am. She knows you, Sade's voice rose, a defiant Lagos heat meeting the American ice. She tasted the jollof. She felt the braids. She smiled, Marcus. Your mother is in there, trapped under the care of a woman who wants her gone. The use of his first name smacked the air between them like a dry branch. Marcus stood, his shadow lengthening across the obsidian desk until it swallowed her feet. You are a maid, Sade. You have been here for weeks. Vanessa has been here for years. You see smiles because you want to justify your paycheck. She sees the reality of a deteriorating mind because she's the one who will have to carry the burden when I'm gone. He walked around the desk, stopping inches from her. The scent of his expensive cologne was a wall. Do not bring these unfounded accusations to me again. Vanessa is my family. You are staff. If you ever speak against her character again, you won't just be fired. I'll ensure your visa is revoked before you reach the lobby. Sade looked into the eyes of the Mafia Boss and saw a man who was a genius at war but a fool at home. He had chosen the choreographed lie over the messy truth because the lie was easier to live with. I am a servant in your house, yes, Sade whimpered, her heart breaking for the woman in the wheelchair 40 feet away. But I am not blind. I hope you see the truth before there is nothing left of her to save. She turned and walked out, the heavy glass door clicking shut behind her with the finality of a prison cell. Behind her, Marcus stood in the shadows of his own making, choosing the silence of a predator over the cry of his own blood.
The penthouse was bathed in the dying amber of a Seoul sunset, a deceptive gold that made the glass walls look like they were weeping. Sade was in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she packed a small container of jollof rice, her heart still heavy from Marcus's dismissal. The silence from the living area wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, vibrating with a tension that set her teeth on edge. Then, the sound broke the stillness. A sharp, wet crack. Sade dropped the spoon. It clattered against the marble, echoing like a gunshot. She moved before she could think, her feet silent and swift. She rounded the corner and skidded to a halt. Vanessa stood over the wheelchair, her cream silk dress shimmering in the low light. Her face, usually a masterpiece of curated grace, was contorted into a mask of pure, ugly loathing. Evelyn's glasses lay shattered on the floor, the wire frames twisted. A vivid red handprint was blooming across the old woman's left cheek, stark against her pale skin. Evelyn wasn't crying. She was simply staring at Vanessa with eyes that had finally, tragically, seen the monster. You stupid, senile bitch, Vanessa hissed, her voice a jagged whisper. She raised her hand again, her palm flat and ready to deliver another strike. I am the only thing standing between you and a locked ward. You will learn to do exactly as I say. The air in the room didn't just chill, it solidified. Sade didn't see the billionaire's fiancé or the high society icon. She saw a predator, and she remembered her grandmother's voice. Strong hands are meant to hold people up. Sade moved. She was a blur of gray uniform and righteous fury. Just as Vanessa's hand began its downward arc, Sade's hand met it in mid-air, catching the woman's wrist in a grip of iron. Vanessa's eyes widened, her mouth falling open in a gasp of shock. Don't, Sade whispered, her voice vibrating with a power that shook the very glass of the penthouse. Ever touch her again. Vanessa sneered, trying to wrench her arm away. Let go of me, you common. The slap Sade delivered wasn't a panicked reaction, it was a correction. It was the weight of every hour Evelyn spent facing a wall, every bruise hidden under a sleeve, and every lie Marcus had swallowed. The sound of Sade's palm meeting Vanessa's cheek was louder than the first strike. It sent the fiancée reeling, her heels catching on the rug until she collapsed onto the cold marble floor, her expensive dress pooling around her like a broken wing. The heavy thud of the penthouse door echoed through the hallway. Marcus stood in the threshold, his coat still over his arm, frozen as he took in the carnage. His mother bruised and shaking, his fiancée on the floor, and his maid standing between them like a guardian at the gates of hell. Sade didn't lower her hand. She didn't look at the boss. She didn't care about the visa or the lobby or the threats. She stood tall, her chest heaving, the servant protocol, dead and buried under her feet. She was no longer just a maid. She was the only truth left in the room.
The silence in the penthouse was a physical weight, thick with the metallic tang of adrenaline and the cooling scent of a shattered dinner. Vanessa lay on the marble, her hand pressed to a cheek that was rapidly flushing a deep, angry crimson. She looked up at Marcus, her eyes instantly flooding with tears that were as practiced as a stage play. "Marcus, she attacked me. She's gone mad. She hit me because I tried to help your mother." Marcus didn't move. He stood in the doorway, his gaze oscillating between his sobbing fiancée, the broken glasses on the floor, and Sade, who stood like a stone monolith over Evelyn. He didn't look like a mafia boss in that moment. He looked like a man watching his world tilt on its axis. "Get out," Marcus said, his voice a low, vibrating hollow. "Yes, send her back to Lagos," Vanessa cried, scrambling to her feet, her cream silk dress stained by the floor. "Not her," Marcus snapped, his eyes finally locking onto Vanessa with a terrifying, cold clarity. "You, go to the guest wing. Do not leave it." When the clicking of Vanessa's heels faded into a frantic retreat, Marcus walked to the obsidian desk in his office. He didn't call his security team. He didn't call his lawyers. He opened a hidden partition on his monitor, a secondary, encrypted feed he had installed months ago, one even Vanessa didn't know existed. Sade followed him, her hand resting firmly on the handle of Evelyn's wheelchair, bringing the mother into the room where her son would finally see her. 12 minutes, Sade whispered. "Just watch the last 12 minutes of yesterday afternoon." The screen flickered to life. The footage was grainy but undeniable. Marcus watched in a silence so deep it felt like the air had left the room. He saw Vanessa wheel his mother into the corner. He watched the clock on the wall tick away. 1 hour, 2, 3. He saw his fiancée return, not with a blanket or water, but to lean down and whisper into Evelyn's ear, her face twisted in a sneer that never reached the dinner table. He saw the accidental kick to the wheelchair's footrest that jolted Evelyn's frail frame. Then came the footage from 10 minutes ago. He watched Vanessa strike his mother, a casual, bored violence that turned his stomach. He saw the way Evelyn's head snapped back, the way her glasses skittered across the floor like a dying bird. Marcus Vale, a man who had ordered hits and moved millions without blinking, bowed his head. A jagged, choked sound escaped his throat, a sob of pure, unadulterated shame. He had been the architect of his mother's prison, blinded by a choreographed love that was nothing more than a slow-acting poison. He looked up at Sade. The maid was gone. In her place was the only person who had actually loved his mother in 3 years. She was erasing her, Marcus whispered, the realization a blade in his chest. "Right in front of me." "She didn't succeed," Sade said, her voice soft but unyielding. "Evelyn is still here, but the clock just ran out for everyone else."
The office air was thick with the scent of old sins. Marcus sat back in his chair, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in his eyes like a cold fire. He didn't stop with the footage of the penthouse. His fingers flew across the keyboard, tearing through encrypted files he had tucked away since the night his father's car plummeted into the dark waters of the Han River. "She said it was an accident," Marcus whispered, his voice a jagged edge. "She was the one who pulled me from the wreckage. She was the miracle that saved me while my father drowned and my mother broke." Sade stood behind Evelyn's chair, her hand a steady anchor on the older woman's shoulder. "A miracle is rarely that convenient, Mr. Vale. Look at the timing." Marcus opened a subfolder labeled Maintenance Logs July 2023. His father's armored sedan had been serviced just 48 hours before the crash. He pulled up the technician's digital signature. His breath hitched. The lead mechanic wasn't a Vale employee, he was a contractor from Laurent Logistics, Vanessa's father's firm. With a few more keystrokes, Marcus bypassed the redacted insurance reports. There, buried in a forensic scan of the brake lines that had been lost by the precinct, was a photograph of a sliced hydraulic hose. It wasn't a wear and tear, it was a clean surgical cut. They didn't just want the trust fund, Marcus said, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow. They wanted the throne. They killed my father, crippled my mother, and then sent Vanessa to comfort the grieving son until she could legally sign away what was left. He leaned in closer, his eyes scanning a wire transfer dated the morning after the funeral. A 7-figure sum moved from a Laurent offshore account to the lead mechanic's private bank. The choreographed kindness wasn't just a manipulation, it was a victory lap. Vanessa hadn't been mourning with him, she had been hovering like a vulture, waiting for the last witness, Evelyn, to be silenced forever. Evelyn's hand suddenly tightened on the armrest, her eyes, sharp and clear for the first time in years, fixed on the screen. She let out a low, guttural moan, a sound of mourning that had been bottled up in the silence of that white-walled corner. She knew. She had always known. Marcus looked at his mother, then at Sade. The shame he had felt moments ago transmuted into a cold, lethal resolve. He was no longer just a son or a grieving man. He was the head of the Vale family, and the wolves were inside his house. "They took my father's life," Marcus said, his voice dropping into the terrifying register of a man who was about to go to war. "And they tried to steal my mother's soul." He stood up, the obsidian desk reflecting a man who had finally stopped being a fool. "Sade, stay with her. Lock the door. I have a debt to settle, and the Laurents are about to find out exactly how I handle my accounts."
The siren lights of the Seoul Metropolitan Police bled through the penthouse glass, washing the marble in a rhythmic, accusatory pulse of red and blue. Vanessa Laurent didn't go quietly. Her screams echoed through the vaulted foyer, a jagged, ugly sound that stripped away the last of her lifestyle brand elegance. As the silver cuffs snapped around her wrists, the mask didn't just slip, it shattered, revealing a woman hollowed out by greed. Marcus stood by the door, his face a granite mask, watching as the woman who had helped murder his father was led into the night. When the heavy elevator doors finally hissed shut, the silence that followed wasn't the cold, pressurized vacuum of a fortress. It was the quiet of a fever breaking. Sade was in the kitchen, the steam from the stove rising like a prayer. She didn't look up when Marcus entered. She simply handed a bowl of warm jollof rice to Evelyn, who sat at the head of the wooden table, not in a corner, not facing a wall, but centered in the heart of the home. Evelyn took the spoon with a trembling hand, her new braids catching the soft amber glow of the overhead lights. She looked at her son, and for the first time in 3 years, the recognition in her eyes wasn't clouded by fear. It was a blessing. Marcus pulled out a chair, the heavy wood scraping against the marble with a grounded, honest sound. He looked at the vibrant orange rice, the steam carrying the scent of Scotch bonnets and wood smoke. He didn't ask for a report. He didn't issue an order. He simply picked up a spoon. "Tuesday was always the day my father insisted we eat together," Marcus said, his voice low, the jagged edges of the Mafia Boss softening into the cadence of a son. No phones, no business, just family. He took a bite, the heat of the spices hitting his tongue, blooming in his chest. It was a direct contrast to the cold, sterile lies he had lived on for years. Across the table, Sade sat down, her gray uniform apron finally discarded, revealing a simple wrap dress of her own. She wasn't a servant tonight. She was the architect of this piece. "In Lagos, we say that a house is just stone and glass until a fire is lit in the kitchen," Sade murmured, watching Evelyn take a slow, deliberate bite of the food that had brought her back to life. Marcus looked around the penthouse. The Namsan Tower still glittered in the distance, and the height was still dizzying, but the mafia-chic coldness had evaporated. The scent of the Laurent roses was gone, replaced by the earthy, honest aroma of a meal shared in safety. Marcus reached across the table, his large hand covering Sade's for a brief, silent second, not a gesture of a boss to a maid, but of one survivor to another. "Thank you, Sade," he whispered, "for remembering the way home."
The house was no longer a vault or a prison. As the three of them sat in the quiet glow of the kitchen, the marble didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like a foundation. For the first time in 43 floors of glass and steel, the Vale penthouse was finally a home.
Sade broke every rule to save Evelyn. But if breaking the rules costs you everything, is it still worth it? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe to this channel to see more stories where the invisible heroes finally get their voice.